It's the dawn of September 26th, 1946. The weather was clear and cool, but things were going to heat up, in more ways than one. On this day, Union Pacific train number 223, the Transcontinental Limited, is making its way westbound from Chicago, Illinois to Los Angeles, California. This was a mid-level train, making only a few stops along the way. One of these was Yermo, California for a crew change. The crew for this leg of the journey was 63-year-old engineer Pearl S. Parker and fireman Richard J. Zeltmeyer. In addition, 3 other Union Pacific employees stood at the platform: foreman Edward E. Davis, age 44, and car inspectors Rowland S. Critcher and Jesse May, aged 41 and 30 respectively. The train arrived on time at 5:50 a.m. On this day, the train consisted of one of Union Pacific's relatively new at the time Class FEF-3 484 steam locomotives, number 835, the first in its class, but not the first FEF type overall. These engines boasted a large 100 square feet firebox, 63,800 pounds per force of tractive effort, 80-inch diameter drive wheels, and weighing in at over 486,340 pounds from the locomotive alone. These late war babies were found on preferably fast passenger service such as the Transcon, but could also handle freight service as they would in their later careers. Behind 835 was a UP baggage car, 4 chair cars, half being from the Union Pacific and the other 2 being from Chicago Northwestern, 2 UP diners, and 4 Pullman sleepers. All 11 cars, apart from 1 chair car, were pre-World War II builds from Pullman Standard, the outlier being built in 1942. After the train had come to a stop, the incoming crew indicated nothing was amiss with the train nor the journey, so they took their leave, and 835 was topped up with water and fuel oil in the tender. Once that was done, the crew went into the cab to check for any faults. They find none. The train's conductor, 58-year-old Joseph Murray, joins the head-end crew to discuss the run into Los Angeles. Normally, crew changes between Las Vegas and Los Angeles didn't happen here at this small station, but nevertheless, the watches were compared to ensure they had the right time, and the car inspectors performed brake tests to ensure their safe operation. Once that was all done, the train got the all clear to highball at 6:05 a.m., running a few minutes late. The train eventually reached the Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe double-track main line near Daggett. It made a station stop at Barstow, California, where the train was delayed even further to 9 minutes late. This didn't bode well, as the Transcon was scheduled to arrive in Los Angeles at 10:20 a.m., and the distance between there and the stop before, Yermo, was 165 miles, requiring an average speed of 37 miles an hour to make up the lost time. This was possible if the station stops and any necessary flag stops were done quick and efficiently, but so far this wasn't really the case. Parker was faced with quite the dilemma. How the hell was he going to get this train back on schedule, if at all? Back in the old days, you got in more trouble for being late than breaking the rules, and Parker was an old-timer who, while not having a perfect record, had never had a serious accident. At least, not yet. The Santa Fe governed the operations of Union Pacific trains on the Daggett to Riverside Junction track, stating that passenger trains had to run to schedule as listed on the timetable, while of course observing the speed restrictions on the curves, but of course there were still posted speed limits on the main too, the maximum allowed being around 100 miles an hour, according to an employee timetable posted on June of 1946. No one really knew the top speed of the Union Pacific FEF class locomotives, but the maximum allowed for them was 90 miles an hour. Santa Fe's timetable also included a rule that permitted engineers to exceed scheduled speeds if necessary to make meeting points or connections, but only if the conductor had been asked and agreed to it, since he was still in charge of the train, basically the captain of the ship. This rule, however, didn't apply to maximum locomotive speeds nor speed restrictions on curves, and it also didn't really exist on the Union Pacific, even though the max speed of the Transcon between Los Angeles and Riverside on Union Pacific territory was only a mere 75 miles an hour. Parker was well aware of this loophole, as he had gotten in trouble for going 9 over the limit 2 weeks before between Walnut and Bartolo on the first sub. So, given the higher speeds on the Santa Fe, the rule about said speeds, and the lack of stops until San Bernardino, he figured the hell with it and pushed 835 to 90 miles an hour. However, there was a problem. Curves. 2 of them. The first was a 60-mile-per-hour restricted curve at Oro Grande. The other, and more dangerous, was Curve 28 near Victorville. This one was a 6-degree right-hand turn with a 3.5-inch of super elevation wedged in between the Mojave River and the outcropping of rock. It was restricted to 40 miles per hour max, especially for westbounds, as the spiral was shorter on that side. Parker would have to slow down for both curves regardless, stepping from 90 to 60 and then 40 miles an hour, only to get back up to speed once both curves were cleared. However, this wasn't exactly how the events would transpire. Despite literally flying down the line, averaging 90 miles an hour, Parker did slow down for Oro Grande, but as for Curve 28, the Transcon hurtles off the track, doing over 60 miles an hour. It's unclear exactly what derailed first, but Parker, the engineer who survived, testified he felt the engine lurch and eventually topple cab over wheels, the tender following right behind without uncoupling, while the resulting momentum scattered the passenger cars, which zigzagged like toys. Parker tried to grab onto something as the engine flipped onto its side, but wasn't strong enough, falling across the cab onto the fireman's seat. The fireman, Zeltmeyer, tried to ride out the impact, but was badly injured, being caught in the window frame and having his left arm and leg pinned under the frame as the ballast was kicked up everywhere. Parker, after getting up from his injuries, tried to free his fireman, but it was no use. He was stuck. The passengers, by comparison, were tossed and battered in the wreckage. The baggage car slewed across the main tracks and wedged itself against the rock walls on each side of the right-of-way, acting as a giant barrier preventing the first 3 cars from slamming into 835's tender. However, it wasn't a full saving grace, as while the first lightweight coach was stopped by the baggage car, the second coach flipped over the first one, crushing it before smashing into the baggage car, bending its front end sideways. The third coach hit the rear of the second one and jackknifed as well, taking the diners with it. The Pullman sleepers were all unharmed. 6 people perished in the crash, all in the same area between the rear of the first coach and the head end of the second coach. 2 male passengers and 1 car attendant died in the second coach, and 3 women died in the rear of the first coach. 32 others were also injured. Conductor Murphy ran to the head end to check on the crew and alert them of what had happened. There he found Parker in a state of shock, wandering in a mere daze over what had just happened. Murphy continued westward looking for a phone to report the accident and get help as soon as possible. Thankfully, the wreck didn't occur far from Highway 66, and a nearby power plant employee also called ahead to Victorville Depot to stop all train traffic. Rescuers arrived soon after, along with wrecking crews and local volunteers willing to help. Among them were 7 members of the Victorville High School football team, led by 16-year-old Jerry Bowles. It took them 3 hours with acetylene torches to free the last victims from the mangled cars. Because of the lack of hospitals in the Victorville area, apart from a nearby army depot, 30 of the 32 injured were airlifted by a C-47 hospital aircraft with a convoy of ambulances arranged on each end of the airlift. Engineer Parker was released from the hospital shortly thereafter, suffering only cuts and bruises. His fireman, Zeltmeyer, was seriously injured, but was eventually released, as was the head-end brakeman, George C. McKenzie, who couldn't even flag down opposing trains because he was tossed about in the coaches. The wreckage was cleared the next evening at 8 p.m. on September 27th. A joint hearing and investigation was launched by the Santa Fe and Union Pacific officials the next month, along with representatives from the California Railroad Commission and the Interstate Commerce Commission, who regulated railroad operations at the time. The crew gave testimonies at the hearing, all apart from the fireman who hired an attorney to represent himself in his legal action against Union Pacific, and the head-end brakeman McKenzie, who just cut his losses and took his retirement. Now, let's tackle the elephant in the room. The train was quite clearly speeding. The center of gravity on 835 was 78 inches above the top of the rail for both the tender and locomotive. This, along with the structure of the curve, indicated, according to calculations by Union Pacific's chief mechanical engineer Frank Jumper, was that the maximum safe passage speed was 48.2 miles an hour, and at speeds above 78.1 miles an hour, the train would have toppled over, just like it did. However, Santa Fe set the speed limit of the curve to 40 miles an hour. Union Pacific disagreed, setting it to 35 miles an hour on their timetables. Parker right away stated he wasn't speeding, but he couldn't explain how the locomotive toppled over. Determined to find out, the Santa Fe and Union Pacific officials investigated 835's cab, and what they found was quite stunning. There was no speedometer present in the cab to start with. Quite baffling when you think about it, but it wasn't entirely uncommon back in those days. Another wreck of a similar fashion would occur on the Pennsylvania Railroad in Woodbridge, New Jersey, when the broker fell off a temporary trestle in 1951, where the locomotive in that case, a 462 Class K4 Pacific number 2445, also lacked a speedometer in the cab and was caused by overspeed. Parker also didn't complain about the lack of a speedometer. His pride wouldn't let him, since he stated that despite the lack of a speedometer, he could judge the speed of the train by the seat of his pants, according to testimonies. This could have been excused if it weren't for the throttle being found wide open and the brakes in full release. He didn't even slow down before the locomotive toppled over. The conductor Murphy spoke up, stating he didn't believe the train was speeding either. However, he did state his attention was more toward collecting tickets than observing the train's speed. Now, of course, this was before the age of black boxes and modern computers that could accurately read parameters like the train's speed, but what sealed the fate for Parker was the time reports of rear brakeman Louis E. Roy, 41 years of age, who, by Santa Fe rules, had to record the times the train passed each station. His reports indicated the total mileage between Barstow and the curve was 33.5 miles. The timetable indicated this travel time should have taken 37 minutes, averaging about 54 miles an hour. However, according to the notes, it took the Transcon 32 minutes to cover the full distance, meaning the train was averaging at speeds of 62.8 miles an hour, just shy of 10 over the limit. Roy was in a tight spot, but he had to admit Parker was indeed speeding. The Interstate Commerce Commission released their final report on November 7, 1946, blaming excessive speed, but a month before, on October 6, Santa Fe and UP officials had found Parker responsible for speeding, which led to the catastrophe, and he was promptly fired by Union Pacific. And it's highly likely he never got to return to work with them ever again. It's not confirmed if Roy and Murphy were also found responsible for the accident, but it's likely both continued their careers with Union Pacific until retirement. As for the train cars, it's safe to assume the crushed coaches were scrapped after the wreck, while the others continued service till being withdrawn. 835, the locomotive involved, was sent to the East Los Angeles shop for repairs and returned to service by late 1946 or early 1947. It even pulled Harry S. Truman's campaign train on September 20th, 1948, as seen here in Denver, Colorado. Sadly, though, it was retired from service by 1959 and scrapped by 1962. However, the number plate still exists today on display inside Union Pacific's museum car named Promontory, a former baggage car. The FEF-3 series is also survived by one lone operational sibling. No doubt you've heard of it before. 844, the last one built, who's still operational today on the Union Pacific, pulling various excursions, never officially being retired by the Union Pacific, with sibling 838 being a part donor. Other FEF series engines that survive include FEF-1 814 at Rails West Railroad Museum in Council Bluffs, Iowa, and FEF-2 833 in the Utah State Railroad Museum in Ogden, Utah. As for the Transcontinental Limited, the train was abolished by 1947, its record being permanently ruined by the wreck, being absorbed into the pre-existing Los Angeles Limited until its January 1954 last run. As for the right-of-way, it is now owned by Santa Fe's successor, BNSF, and the tracks still see both Union Pacific and BNSF traffic today. The bridges, however, were replaced between 2020 and 2021 with a new design. By then, both bridges were over 100 years old. The tracks were also straightened, eliminating the 35 and 40 mile/hour speed limit of the old S-curve. This wreck, along with the prior Naperville wreck in April of the same year on the Chicago, Burlington, and Quincy, contributed to the Interstate Commerce Commission's ruling limiting train speeds to 79 miles per hour maximum for lines that lack an automatic train stop system or cab signals. Only a few ever qualified for higher speeds, such as the Pennsylvania Railroad's Northeast Corridor, which still, as of today, operates speeds of 100 to 125 miles an hour, with even 150 miles per hour in select regions. 78 years later, this still proves to be true. However, more high-speed rail, both by Amtrak and private companies, is being promised all across America. But I feel like that's a topic for another video. Hello everyone, Thunderbolt here. Before you go, I want to heavily thank Automatic for requesting this video and providing the simulation footage seen in this video. He also provided me with links to photos, the official ICC report, and the biggest source being this newspaper article on streamliners released in 2006 that goes into much greater detail about the wreck. This video couldn't have been done without his help, so seriously, thank you for all you done, Otto. You're great. He also has a video where he reads the full article word for word, so be sure to check that out as well. I also want to thank you for watching this video. A lot has been going on in my life, a lot of it being personal, so take care. We'll see you next time.